I watched the 20-year-old tighten the Velcro on his brand new competition gloves, a self-satisfied smirk cutting across his face as he told half the block he was about to send me to the emergency room. He was convinced I was just a soft, middle-aged suburban homeowner with nothing under the flannel but a slow metabolism. He had no idea he had just cornered a former Marine Recon team leader on his own front lawn. For the last 7 years, my life had been carefully, deliberately uneventful. After 16 years of active duty, 4 combat deployments through Fallujah, Sangin, and 2 rotations I still can't talk about with anyone who doesn't hold the right clearance, I had made peace with the idea of quiet. I traded my body armor and night vision for a pair of pruning shears and a battered pickup truck that started on the second try if I was patient with it. My name is Marcus Halloran. I run a small independent security consultancy out of a converted garage office, doing threat assessments for private aviation companies and a handful of energy sector clients. I live in Willow Ridge, a leafy upper-middle-class development just outside Charlotte, North Carolina, with my 17-year-old daughter, Hannah. Willow Ridge was the kind of neighborhood where the loudest argument of the year usually revolved around whose sprinkler head was overshooting the property line or which family had left their Christmas lights up too far into February. That is, until the Voss family purchased the enormous 4-acre lot with a column brick estate directly beside my modest single-story home. Randall Voss was aggressively new money. He had built a fortune flipping distressed commercial real estate during the tail end of a bad market cycle, and he wore that fortune like a costume. He drove a chrome-wrapped Range Rover, spoke as though every conversation was happening across a crowded stadium, and carried himself with the unshakable certainty that a bank balance could substitute for character. But Randall wasn't the actual problem. The actual problem was his 20-year-old son, Bryce. Bryce was a textbook study in unearned swagger. He was thickly built in the way you only get from a decade of protein shakes and mirror time. He drove a lowered Mustang with an aftermarket exhaust that rattled every window on our side of the street. And he was rarely seen out of the branded gear from an overpriced martial arts academy called Ironclad Combat Athletics. Within his first 10 days in the neighborhood, Bryce had bolted a 180-pound heavy bag from an iron chain looped around the mature magnolia tree just inside their property line. Every afternoon, I'd sit on my back porch with a mug of coffee and watch him work himself into a lather on that bag. He threw wide, arcing hooks and jumping kicks that would look flashy on a highlight reel, but left him wide open every single time. I could see it the way a mechanic hears a bad transmission. He'd been trained for medals and Instagram clips, not for the ugly, unpredictable business of survival. His chin floated in the air like a lantern. His footwork was sloppy. He telegraphed his lead hand so heavily you could pour a cup of coffee before it landed. None of that was my business. Let the kid play warrior with his heavy bag. But then, slowly, the bullying started. It started small. It always does. Bryce's first target wasn't a person. It was principle. He decided that the invisible line separating the Voss property from the rest of the world was a fortress wall, and anyone who crossed it, even by inches, needed to be reminded. It started with the landscaping crew that had been servicing the neighborhood for years. He confronted the foreman one Tuesday morning about a single tire track that had dipped onto the edge of their lawn. I watched from my kitchen window as Bryce squared his shoulders, puffed his chest, and jabbed a finger at a man twice his age, until the foreman quietly waved his crew back into their trucks and drove off. 2 days later, it was the mail carrier. She had cut through the corner of the Voss driveway on her walking route, the same shortcut she had used for years without incident. Bryce came storming down the front steps in gym shorts and a tank top, following her 3 houses down the sidewalk, lecturing her the entire way about trespassing and property rights. She kept her head down and her pace steady, but I could see her hands shaking as she slid mail into the next box. Then the neighborhood kids started avoiding our end of the street entirely. 2 brothers who used to ride their bikes past every afternoon began looping the long way around the block. When I asked their mother about it at the mailbox one evening, she lowered her voice and told me that Bryce had blocked the sidewalk with his body one afternoon, arms crossed, and told them to find another route. He hadn't touched them. He hadn't needed to. He was 6'2" and 220 pounds of manufactured menace, and they were 12. My first direct interaction with Bryce came on a humid Saturday afternoon in late June. Hannah was in the driveway helping me change the oil on the pickup, wearing an old t-shirt and shorts, her hair pulled back under a Braves cap. She had a Bluetooth speaker sitting on the tailgate playing music at a completely reasonable volume, the kind of volume you'd hear at a coffee shop. Bryce came strolling across the invisible boundary between our lawns, shirtless, wearing his black belt looped around the waistband of his athletic shorts like a trophy sash. He didn't say a word to me. He walked directly to my daughter, reached over her, and picked the speaker up off the tailgate. "I'm trying to relax," Bryce told her, holding the speaker just out of her reach. "Kill the noise." Hannah froze. I saw her eyes flick toward me, wide and uncertain. I was already moving, but I made sure my movement didn't look like movement. I set the oil filter wrench down on the workbench, wiped my hands on a shop rag, and walked toward them with the measured, unhurried pace of a man who had all the time in the world. "Running signals panic. Panic signals prey. Something I can help you with?" I asked, keeping my voice flat, my hands loose and open at waist level. To Bryce, it looked like polite surrender. To anyone who had spent a career kicking indoors, it was a ready stance disguised as passivity. Bryce turned toward me and gave me the same head-to-toe assessment he probably gave every new opponent at his gym. I'm 6'2", 44 years old, and on that particular Saturday, I was wearing an oil-stained Braves shirt and jeans with a hole in one knee. I looked like a guy whose weekend plans involved a hardware store and a lawn. "Your kid's music is annoying," Bryce said, stepping in close enough that I could smell the pre-workout on his breath and the cologne he'd clearly bathed in that morning. "I already handled it." "You got a problem, old man?" My pulse didn't shift a single beat. When you've had rounds crack past your ear close enough to feel the pressure wave, an overgrown gym rat in a suburban driveway doesn't move the needle. I've stood in a stairwell in Songen with 3 magazines left and a radio full of static. This wasn't that. "Bryce, right?" I said quietly. "I'm Marcus. That's my daughter, that's my speaker, and this is my driveway. Set it back down on the tailgate, walk back across the grass, and we don't have a conversation. Touch her again, or come at her again, and we absolutely will." Bryce blinked at me, waiting for the flinch, the raised voice, the escalation that his training and his social ecosystem had taught him to expect. When none of it came, he tried a different tactic. He stepped even closer until we were less than a foot apart and stared directly into my eyes, trying to establish the kind of dominance that works on other 20-year-olds in a gym parking lot. I didn't return the stare. Locking eyes is what amateurs do. Instead, I focused on the small hollow at the base of his throat, which let me track his shoulders, his hips, and both hands simultaneously through peripheral vision. My face stayed completely neutral. He held the pose for maybe 4 seconds before something behind his eyes shifted. He didn't understand what he was looking at, but some primitive part of him recognized that whatever was standing in front of him wasn't reacting the way his instincts said it should. He set the speaker down on the tailgate a little harder than necessary and laughed a short, dismissive laugh. "Whatever, Grandpa," he muttered, backing off 2 steps before turning. "Just keep her noise on your side of the line." He strolled back across the lawn with exaggerated slowness, glancing over his shoulder twice to make sure I was watching. I was. I watched him all the way to his front door. Hannah waited until he was inside before she exhaled. "Dad," she said quietly. "I know, sweetheart. I know." I thought that was the end of it. In a healthy exchange, a man his age would have felt embarrassed at being told no, would have gone home, would have chalked it up to a bad read on the neighbor, and moved on with his life. That's how normal people process minor social defeats. But Bryce Voss was not a normal person. Bryce Voss was a bully in the truest sense of the word. And bullies don't process calm the way normal people do. To a bully, calm looks like weakness. Calm looks like an opening. Calm looks like a target that hasn't figured out it's supposed to be afraid yet. I knew that. I've studied it in the field, in briefings, In after-action reports, the most dangerous people I encountered overseas were rarely the loudest. They were the quiet ones. The loud ones I could predict. But I also knew that reading the pattern doesn't stop the pattern. The only thing that stops a bully in escalation is a hard, unambiguous demonstration that the calm they mistook for weakness was actually restraint. And unfortunately, restraint runs on a finite clock. The clock started ticking the moment Bryce walked back across that lawn. By the middle of July, Bryce had convinced himself that I was afraid of him. I could see it in his body language every time we crossed paths. He walked slower when he passed my property, held eye contact longer, made a show of flexing his forearms when he lifted his mailbox flap. He was auditioning for an audience that only existed inside his own head, and every day that I refused to react. He cranked the volume up another notch. Then came the tournament win. Ironclad Combat Athletics ran a regional semi-contact competition in Charlotte over a weekend in mid-July, and Bryce came home Sunday night with a gaudy 3-foot trophy and a bracket sheet he insisted on showing to everyone who came within 20 feet of his father's driveway. Randall Voss threw a celebration that would have embarrassed a wedding planner. There was a rented tent, a live DJ, catering trucks, and a valet service for the guests parking down the length of our shared street. The bass from the sound system rattled the picture frames on my living room wall until well past midnight. Hannah slept with earplugs. I sat on the back porch nursing a cup of coffee and reading a paperback until the last car finally rolled out around 1:30 in the morning. I could have called the county about the noise ordinance. I didn't. Petty complaints from an anonymous neighbor would have handed Randall exactly the narrative he wanted, an uptight nobody trying to spoil his son's big moment. I understood the shape of the situation I was in. You don't win a war of attrition by firing the first shot at the wrong target. 3 days after the party, the situation escalated in a way that made calling the county feel quaint. Hannah had invited 2 friends over for a study session, a pair of quiet, studious girls from her app chemistry class. They set up on the back patio with textbooks, laptops, and a pitcher of sweet tea. I was in my office finishing a threat assessment for a client in Houston. The sliding door cracked open so I could hear if Hannah called for anything. At first, I only registered the sound of a heavy bag being worked over. That was normal. Bryce hit that bag every afternoon like it owed him money. But then I heard something else. A sharp cracking sound followed by a girl's startled yelp. I stood up from my desk and walked out to the patio. Bryce was on his side of the property line, but only technically. He had dragged his sparring gear out to the edge of the lawn and was throwing full-power spinning kicks into the row of hydrangea bushes my late wife Sarah had planted the year we bought the house. Branches were snapping. Petals were scattered across the grass like confetti. 2 of his gym buddies were sprawled on lawn chairs behind him, phones out, filming and laughing. Every few kicks, Bryce would pause, glance directly at Hannah and her friends on the patio, and make a slow, exaggerated kissing motion with his lips before launching another kick. Hannah caught my eye through the sliding door. She didn't need to say anything. Her face said everything. Something inside my chest went very still. Not angry. Cold, it was the same feeling I used to get right before a stack breach, the moment when personal emotion drops away and something older and more efficient takes over. I set my coffee down on the patio table, told the girls to stay put, and walked across the lawn. I stopped 6 feet short of the property line and let him finish his current combination. There was no point interrupting him mid-motion. It would only give him an excuse to feign injury or offense. "Bryce," I said when he finally paused, chest heaving, sweat rolling down the ridges of his shoulders. "Stop kicking the hydrangeas." He turned toward me slowly, deliberately, playing to the 2 friends behind him. He wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist and gave me a smile that had no warmth in it. "They're hanging over the line," he said. "I'm just doing some pruning, Mark." The bushes were a solid 18 inches inside my property. Both of us knew it. His friends knew it. The satellite that took the plat survey knew it. "I don't care about the hydrangeas," I said. My voice stayed even, conversational. "I care about you making noises at my daughter and her friends. Take your workout somewhere else." Bryce's smile disappeared. Something ugly moved behind his eyes. He glanced over his shoulder at his 2 friends, checking his audience, and then he made the decision that would end up defining the entire summer for him. He stepped over the property line. "You want to talk about my behavior?" he said, closing the distance until he was standing on my grass. "You want to lecture me in front of my boys? You know what I am? I'm a black belt under Sensei Ramos. I could put you through that patio table before you finished blinking, old man." To punctuate the point, he reached up and grabbed a fistful of my t-shirt, twisting the fabric against my collarbone. That was the mistake. I want to be very clear about something. When you spend a decade and a half training close quarters combat at the level I trained it, the response to a hand on your body doesn't route through your conscious mind. There is no internal debate. There is no moment of decision. The response is already installed, and the only thing that stops it from executing at full speed is the deliberate, active choice to hold it back. I held it back. Mostly, my left hand came up and trapped his wrist against my chest, pinning it there. My right hand rotated, my thumb sliding into the soft channel of nerve tissue on the inside of his forearm, and I applied a small, precise amount of downward pressure while simultaneously rolling his elbow toward the sky. It was a textbook compliance hold, the kind you use to move a non-compliant suspect out of a doorway without leaving a bruise. It looks like nothing from 3 feet away. It feels like your entire arm has been plunged into an electrical outlet. Bryce dropped. His knees hit the grass first, then his forehead, and a high, thin sound escaped his throat that his friends definitely heard. The whole exchange took less than a second and a half. I released him immediately, took 2 clean steps back, and raised my hand slightly in the universal gesture of concerned bystander. "Watch your footing there, Bryce," I said, loud enough for the 2 friends on the lawn chairs to hear it clearly. "You all right? Those roots are tricky." He scrambled to his feet, cradling his wrist against his chest, his face the color of a stop sign. From his friend's angle, sitting low in their lawn chairs behind a row of shrubs, it genuinely looked like he had tripped over a root while stepping across the property line. That's how fast it happened. "You did something," Bryce hissed, his voice low enough that his friends couldn't hear the tremor in it. "You did something to my arm." "I didn't touch you, Bryce," I said calmly. "You grabbed me and lost your balance. It happens. Get some ice on that wrist." I turned my back on him and walked toward the patio. Turning your back on an aggressor in most situations is a bad tactical choice. But I understood exactly what kind of threat I was dealing with. Bryce wasn't a stalker. He wasn't a professional. He was a proud kid whose entire identity was built on being seen as dominant, and I had just short-circuited that identity in front of his friends. His nervous system was too busy trying to reboot to launch a second attack. By the time he could organize a follow-up, I was already sliding the patio door shut behind me. "Girls, let's move inside," I said. "The mosquitoes are getting bad." They gathered their books without a word. Hannah moved last, her hand brushing mine as she passed me in the doorway. She didn't ask what had happened. She had seen enough. 90 minutes later, someone was pounding on my front door hard enough to rattle the deadbolt in its housing. I already knew who it was going to be. I checked the peephole, out of habit. Randall Voss stood on my welcome mat, his face flushed a deep crimson, one thick finger poised to hammer at the door again. Bryce stood behind him on the walkway, sullen, cradling his wrist in a way he probably thought looked heroic. I opened the door. "Halloran," Randall barked before I had finished pulling it open. "Did you put your hands on my son?" "Randall," I said evenly. "Your son grabbed my shirt on my property. He lost his footing. I'd suggest we all take a breath." "Take a breath?" Randall's voice climbed half an octave. "Bryce says you twisted his arm behind his back. He can barely move his fingers." "Then Bryce is welcome to file a report," I said. "There's a witness." 2 of them, actually. His friends were sitting 10 feet away. I'd invite anyone who wants to review the situation to do exactly that. That gave Randall a 2-second pause. He hadn't considered that his son's own witnesses might not corroborate the story his son had sold him. He recovered quickly, but not quickly enough to hide the flicker. "You listen to me, Halloran," he said, jabbing that finger toward my sternum without quite committing to make contact. I don't know what you think you are in this neighborhood, but I have resources you can't imagine. I have lawyers on retainer who eat guys like you for breakfast. You come near my boy again, you look at him wrong, you so much as breathe in his direction, and I will bury you in litigation until your granddaughter is paying off the settlement. Are we clear? We're clear, I said. I closed the door. I heard him bark something at Bryce on the walkway, and then their footsteps receded. I walked back to my office, sat down at my desk, and stared at the threat assessment I had been working on. The client in Houston needed the report by Friday. I read the same paragraph 4 times before I gave up, closed the laptop, and went to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. I already knew what was coming. Randall's threat was cheap noise, but his sun was still simmering. And boys like Bryce Voss don't let humiliation rest. The confrontation I had been mentally preparing for arrived on Labor Day weekend, exactly as I had predicted it would. Willow Ridge held an annual block party every year on the Sunday of Labor Day weekend. Families dragged folding tables to the end of the cul-de-sac, fired up half a dozen grills, and set out coolers of soft drinks and beer. Kids ran through a sprinkler set up on the common lawn. Someone always brought a Bluetooth speaker and put on a playlist of classic rock and country. It was the kind of low-key neighborhood event that had been happening in Willow Ridge for longer than I had lived there. It was also, I realized, the moment I saw Bryce Voss walk up the street, exactly the kind of stage his ego had been searching for. I was standing near the drink cooler when they arrived, holding a paper plate with 2 hot dogs and a scoop of potato salad, chatting with a retired firefighter named Frank Doherty, who lived 4 houses down. Hannah was sitting on the curb across the street with 2 of her friends, drinking a lemonade. It was a little after 4 in the afternoon. The sun was still high, the grass was still warm, and everything about the day felt exactly the way a summer block party is supposed to feel. Then Randall's Range Rover rolled slowly up the street and parked at an angle that took up 3 curb spots. Randall climbed out of the driver's seat with a case of imported beer under one arm and a wireless speaker under the other. Already playing his own music at a volume designed to drown out ours, Bryce climbed out of the passenger seat. He was not dressed for a block party. He was wearing a fitted rash guard with his gym's logo across the chest, black grappling shorts, and athletic slides. He was carrying a gym bag over one shoulder. 2 more of his gym friends climbed out of the back. They fanned out behind him in a loose triangle formation that would have looked ridiculous anywhere except in Bryce's imagination. Conversations across the cul-de-sac quieted. People sensed what was coming the way animals sense weather. Frank Doherty glanced at me sideways. "That kid looks like he came dressed for a fight," Frank muttered. "That kid came dressed for a fight," I said. Bryce walked directly across the common lawn, ignoring the children playing tag, ignoring the neighbors trying to greet him, ignoring the small dog that yipped at his ankles. He stopped 10 feet from me, dropped his gym bag on the pavement with a heavy thud, and raised his voice loud enough to carry the full length of the cul-de-sac. "Marcus," he called out, "you and I have unfinished business." I set my paper plate down on the cooler. I didn't answer him yet. I let the silence stretch, let him hear his own voice hanging awkwardly in the air. "Bryce," I said finally, "it's a block party. Go get a burger." "I don't eat processed garbage," Bryce spat back. He unzipped his gym bag, reached inside, and pulled out 2 sets of 4-ounce MMA gloves. He tossed 1 pair onto the grass at my feet. "You got real lucky with that dirty little wrist trick on my lawn. I want a rematch. Right here. Right now. Real gloves, real ground, no cheap shots. Let's see how tough you really are." The Bluetooth speakers had all fallen silent. Every adult on the cul-de-sac had turned toward us. Hannah was already on her feet. Randall was leaning against the side of his Range Rover 15 feet away, arms folded across his chest, wearing a small, satisfied smile that told me everything I needed to know about who had suggested this little performance. Bryce's 2 friends had positioned themselves at a wide angle behind him, phones already out, recording. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst. This had been planned in the driveway before they left the house. I ran the calculations in about 2 seconds. Walking away would tell Bryce that all his instincts about me had been correct. The harassment wouldn't stop. it would metastasize, and the next time it happened, Hannah might be alone. Calling the police would put a bored county deputy in the middle of a he said, she said dispute that would, at absolute best, result in Bryce receiving a stern warning and going home to plan something quieter and worse. Neither option protected my daughter. Neither option ended it. There was only one path that ended it, and Bryce had helpfully drawn a map to it and handed it to me in front of 40 witnesses. I looked across the street at Hannah. She was standing very still, her lemonade forgotten on the curb. Her friends had scooted a little away from her, the way people instinctively do when they sense something is about to happen. I gave her a small, deliberate nod. Just once. It said, I've got this. It said, watch. It said, I'm sorry you have to see this, but you're going to be okay. She nodded back. Just once. I turned back to Bryce. You sure this is what you want? I asked. My voice had changed. I heard it change. The polite suburban register I used at the hardware store and the parent-teacher conferences had dropped away, and something quieter and flatter had replaced it. Frank Doherty, standing beside me, took one small step backward. He'd heard the change too. Scared, old man? Bryce taunted. He was already tightening the Velcro on his gloves with his teeth, a move he had clearly practiced in front of a mirror. His friends whooped behind him. Come on, put the gloves on. Let's give the neighborhood a show. Okay, I said quietly. I didn't reach for the gloves lying in the grass. Gloves are for protecting your knuckles from someone else's skull. They served no purpose I needed. I pulled my flannel overshirt off, folded it once, and set it on top of the cooler beside my paper plate. Underneath, I was wearing a plain gray t-shirt and jeans. I toed off my work boots and stepped out onto the grass in my socks. Better footing than rubber soles on a warm lawn. I walked slowly to the center of the common green and stopped. I turned to face Bryce and let my hands hang loose at my sides, elbows slightly bent, weight evenly distributed. To the neighbors, it looked like I was standing there doing nothing. To anyone who had ever trained close quarters combat above the recreational level, it was a bladed neutral posture that could pivot into 6 different responses without a wasted motion. Randall's laugh carried across the lawn. Better call an ambulance now, folks. Save some time. Bryce bounced on the balls of his feet, shadowboxing the air with sharp, fast combinations designed to look intimidating. He circled slightly to my left. Any rules, tough guy? He sneered. 1, I said. When you're on the ground and you're done, you stay there. Bryce grinned wider. He thought I was joking. He didn't wait for a signal. Bullies never do. He let out a sharp theatrical bark of a shout and lunged, leading with a stiff jab and following it with a heavy overhand right aimed at the hinge of my jaw. It was the same combination he had drilled 10,000 times against pads at Ironclad. To the neighbors, it looked terrifyingly fast. To me, it looked like a man throwing punches through waist-deep water. I had watched him telegraph that right hand from my back porch for 11 straight weeks. His shoulder dropped a full quarter second before the fist moved. I didn't retreat. Retreating is what he was expecting, what his entire game plan was built around. I stepped forward and slightly to the outside of his lead foot, angling my head off the center line. His jab passed above my left shoulder. His overhand right sailed through empty air where my temple had been a heartbeat earlier. His own momentum carried him past me, and I helped him along by placing my right palm flat against his shoulder blade and giving him exactly the amount of forward energy he had been trying to put into me. Bryce stumbled 4 steps past me, arms windmilling for balance, and only just managed to keep his feet before he hit the asphalt at the edge of the cul-de-sac. He spun around, his face already darkening. Lucky, he barked. His friends laughed, but the laughter had a nervous edge now. He reset. He bounced higher on his toes. His breathing was already faster than it should have been for 2 combinations. Adrenaline was flooding his system, and it wasn't the useful kind. It was the ego poison kind that makes your hands shake and your vision tunnel. He decided to go with his signature move, the spinning back kick. It was the technique that had won him the regional trophy. In a controlled ring on a padded mat against a compliant sparring partner, It was genuinely impressive. On uneven grass, in socks, against someone who wasn't going to stand still and wait for it, it was tactical suicide. He faked a jab, dropped his weight, and pivoted. The instant his back turned toward me, I moved. I closed the distance before his kicking leg had fully extended. His heel whipped harmlessly through the air behind me. I planted my right foot behind his pivot leg and drove a flat, open palm into the meat of his shoulder blade. Physics did the rest. Both of Bryce's feet came off the ground at the same time. He went completely horizontal in the air for 1 full second, arms splayed, mouth open in surprise. He landed flat on his back on the packed summer earth with a sound like a wet duffel bag dropped from a second-story window. Every ounce of air in his lungs came out of him at once in a single ragged wheeze. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman gasped. A child asked her mother if the big man was okay. I stood over him. My hands were still relaxed at my sides. My breathing hadn't changed. I hadn't broken a sweat. "You're on the ground, Bryce," I said. My voice barely rose above conversational. But in the perfect silence of the cul-de-sac, it carried to every ear on the street. That was the rule. "Get up." Randall roared from beside the Range Rover. His voice cracked at the top. "Get up and finish him, Bryce. Stop playing around." That was the wrong thing to say to his son. It replaced humiliation with rage, and rage in an untrained fighter is a gift to the trained one. Bryce rolled to his feet in a burst of wounded pride. His technique was gone. Every dollar his father had poured into ironclad combat athletics evaporated in front of the neighborhood. He wasn't a fighter anymore. He was a 20-year-old having a public tantrum. He lowered his head and charged, arms wide, aiming to tackle me to the grass where he thought his 40 pounds of extra weight would finally count for something. It was his last mistake. I dropped my hips the instant his hands touched my ribs, widening my base and driving my weight downward. His upward heave halted like he'd tried to lift a parked truck. Before he could reset, I slid my right arm over the back of his neck, hooked my forearm under his jaw, and clamped my left hand over my own right bicep. It wasn't a full choke. I wasn't interested in putting him to sleep in front of a crowd of civilians. It was a controlled headlock, with just enough shoulder pressure to fold him double, his face driven down toward the grass. His own body weight working against him. "Breathe, Bryce," I said quietly near his ear. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. You're panicking. Panic burns oxygen. You need that oxygen." He tried to buck once. His feet dug 2 long trenches in the lawn. Leverage doesn't negotiate. I held him exactly where he was. "Tap the grass," I said. 3 times. "That ends it. Nobody gets hurt. You go home. This is over." For 4 long seconds, he tried to muscle his way out. Then his right hand rose, hesitated, and slapped the ground. Once, twice, a 3rd time. I released him instantly and stepped clean back, hands open at my sides. He sagged onto all 4s, then rolled onto his back, chest heaving, eyes fixed straight up at the sky. Grass stains streaked his rash guard. Dirt caked one side of his face. His 2 friends had lowered their phones and were staring at their shoes. The whole confrontation, from his first punch to his tap, had taken less than 90 seconds. I hadn't thrown a strike. The cul-de-sac was silent for a long beat. Then Frank Doherty, still standing by the cooler, cleared his throat and said, "To no one in particular." "Well, all right then." Randall came off the Range Rover screaming about lawyers and assault charges. 2 neighbors quietly held up their phones. They had recorded the entire thing. When the county deputies arrived 12 minutes later, the footage told the story cleanly, and the deputies, one of them a former reservist, who recognized the way I had held Bryce's neck, took Randall aside for a very direct conversation about the difference between the aggressor and the defender. The Vosses put their house on the market 6 weeks later. Bryce was quietly asked not to return to Ironclad after his instructor saw the video. The house sold in November. I watched the moving truck pull away on a cold, gray afternoon while I drank a cup of coffee on my porch. Hannah came out and stood next to me with her own mug. She didn't say anything for a long minute. "You okay, Dad?" she asked eventually. I'm okay, sweetheart. The magnolia tree in the yard next door was finally free of its heavy bag, swaying quietly in the November wind. The neighborhood was quiet again. If this story hit the spot, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Drop a comment telling me how you would have handled Bryce, and share this video with anyone who appreciates a good dose of instant karma. Thanks for watching.